the world where nothing happened. There is a world where nothing ever happens. No disasters interrupt the flow of daily life. No strange cut nine leave people questioning reality. No moments linger unfinished or unresolved. Everything moves forward with quiet, almost unnatural precision, as if guided by an invisible hand determined to keep things normal. At first, it feels like peace, but then small inconsistencies begin to surface. A car accident that should have blocked an entire street vanishes without a trace. One moment there is shattered glass, twisted metal, sirens echoing in the distance, and the next, everything is gone. The road is clear. People walk by without a second glance. No one remembers. No one questions it, except him. At first, he doubts himself. Memory is fragile after all. Easy to distort, easy to rewrite. He convinces himself it was a mistake, a trick of perception, a moment of confusion. But it keeps happening. A conversation he clearly remembers, erased. A person he spoke to, gone. A moment that felt real, reduced to nothing. And each time, the world closes the gap seamlessly. Reality reshapes itself, smoothing over the irregularity as if it never existed. Not gradually, not imperfectly, instantly. That's when he understands. This world doesn't allow anomalies. Anything that doesn't belong, anything too strange, too chaotic, too unpredictable, is removed. Not only from the physical world, but from the minds of everyone within it. Memories are adjusted, events are rewritten, the narrative is corrected, all to preserve the illusion. A perfect, uninterrupted reality where nothing ever goes wrong, where nothing ever happens, but perfection has a flaw. Sometimes the correction fails, sometimes a fragment remains. A memory that refuses to disappear, a feeling that something is missing, a quiet, persistent awareness that the world is not as stable as it appears. People like him carry these fragments. They remember what others cannot, and because of that, they don't fit. They exist outside the correction, like loose threads in a tightly woven fabric, unaccounted for, unresolved, glitches. The more he notices, the clearer it becomes. Patterns emerge, repetitions, moments that almost repeat, but not quite, as if reality is constantly adjusting itself in the background, rewriting its own code to maintain order. But every system has limits, and every correction leaves behind something, no matter how small, a trace, a fragment, a memory. And if even one memory survives, then something did happen, even in a world determined to pretend that nothing ever does. The realization. At first, he tried to explain it away. There were always reasonable answers for unreasonable things. At least that's what he had believed. Memory could be unreliable. Perception could be flawed. The human mind, after all, was known for filling in gaps, distorting details, reshaping events into something more coherent than reality ever was. So when the first incident happened, he dismissed it. A collision at an intersection, loud, violent, undeniable. He had seen it clearly, the impact, the debris, the stunned silence that followed. And then, nothing. No wreckage, no traffic, no witnesses reacting. The street was empty, calm, untouched. It didn't make sense, but he told himself it didn't have to. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe he had looked at the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe his mind had stitched together fragments into something that felt real. He let it go, but reality didn't, because it happened again. A different place. A different moment, but the same pattern. Something occurred, something impossible to ignore, and then just as suddenly it was gone. Not faded, not resolved, erased. This time, he didn't look away. He stayed. He watched. He waited for someone, anyone to react, a passerby, a driver, a witness who could confirm that what he saw had actually happened. But no one did. People moved as if nothing had interrupted them. Conversations continued. Footsteps remained steady. Eyes stayed forward. It was as if the event had never existed, and that was the moment something inside him shifted. Because it wasn't just the world that had changed, it was the people. He began to test it, carefully at first, subtly. He asked questions about things he knew had occurred, small inconsistencies, recent moments that should still be fresh in memory. The responses were always the same: confusion, denial, correction. That never happened. You must be mistaken. Are you feeling okay? Each answer felt rehearsed, but not intentionally. There was no deception in their voices, only certainty. A quiet, unshakable belief that reality had always been exactly as they remembered it. exactly as it currently was. That's when the pattern revealed itself. It wasn't just that events were disappearing, they were being replaced. Reality wasn't leaving gaps, it was rewriting them. Every anomaly, every disruption, every moment that didn't align with the world's internal logic was corrected, adjusted, smoothed out. And the most terrifying part wasn't the erasure, it was the precision. There were no visible seams, no lingering distortions, no evidence of change, except for one thing: him. He remembered. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough to notice the differences, enough to feel the inconsistencies pressing against his thoughts like something trying to break through. At first, he thought that made him observant. Then he thought it made him unlucky. Now he understood what it really meant. He wasn't supposed to remember. Whatever controlled this process, whatever mechanism allowed reality to correct itself so seamlessly, wasn't failing completely. It was failing selectively. And somehow, for some reason, he had been excluded from the correction. Left outside the rewrite, a variable that hadn't been accounted for, a piece that didn't fit. The realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, layer by layer, until there was no room left for denial. This world was not stable, it was maintained. Every moment of normalcy was enforced. Every absence of chaos was deliberate. The peace people lived in wasn't natural. It was constructed, preserved by something that refused to let reality deviate too far from its intended path. And whenever it did, it was fixed. Instantly, completely, silently. He looked around at the people passing by, their expressions calm, their movements predictable, their lives uninterrupted. They believed in a world where nothing ever went wrong, where nothing strange ever happened, where reality was consistent and safe. And for them, it was, because they were part of it. But he wasn't, not anymore. Because once you see the correction, once you recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you remember what the world has tried to erase, you stop being part of the system that forgets. You become something else, something the system cannot fully control, something it cannot fully remove, something that exists between what happened and what was allowed to remain. A flaw in the design, a contradiction, a memory that refused to disappear, a realization that changed everything, even if, to everyone else, nothing had changed at all. The rule of this world. It took him longer than he expected to understand the rules, not because they were complex, but because they were too simple. At first glance, the world appeared stable, predictable, even comforting. Cause led to effect. Actions had consequences. Time moved forward in a straight, uninterrupted line. There were no visible cracks, no signs of instability. But that was only because the system was designed that way, because anything that threatened that illusion was removed. The rule of this world was not written anywhere. No one spoke of it, no one acknowledged it, and yet it governed everything with absolute authority. The world corrects itself, not occasionally, not under extreme circumstances, always. Every deviation, no matter how small, triggered a response. At first, he thought it only applied to major events, accidents, disasters, moments that disrupted the natural order. Those were the easiest to notice, the most obvious. A crash that never happened, a fire that left no trace, a person who was suddenly no longer there. But the deeper he looked, the more he realized the rule extended far beyond that. It wasn't just chaos that was being erased, it was inconsistency, a misplaced object, a sentence spoken out of context, a decision that led to an unpredictable outcome. Anything that introduced instability into the system, anything that made reality less coherent, was subject to correction. And the correction was absolute. Events didn't fade over time. They didn't leave behind remnants or echoes. They were rewritten, completely, seamlessly, as if they had never existed in the first place. But the most disturbing part of the rule wasn't the alteration of reality itself. It was the alteration of memory. Because reality alone isn't enough to define a world. Memory gives it continuity, meaning, identity. And in this world, memory was not a record. It was an extension of the system. Whenever reality was corrected, memory adjusted with it. Instantly, effortlessly. People didn't question what had changed because to them nothing had changed. Their past aligned perfectly with the present, always. There were no contradictions, no lingering doubts, no sense that something was missing. The world didn't just erase events, it erased the possibility that those events had ever occurred. That was the true rule. Nothing that disrupts the system is allowed to remain. Not in matter, not in time, not in thought. It was a closed loop, self-sustaining, self-correcting, flawless in its execution. At least for most people, because there were exceptions, rare, unstable, unintended. He discovered this slowly. At first, it was just fragments, moments that didn't align, feelings that didn't match the world around him, a sense of dissonance that he couldn't explain. Then it became clearer. While others forgot, he remembered. While others adapted, he resisted. The correction still happened, reality still shifted, but something in him remained unchanged, as if the system could rewrite the world, but not him. That's when the rule revealed its second layer. The system wasn't perfect. It didn't fail often, but when it did, the failure wasn't random. It created anomalies. People who retained fragments of what had been erased. People who existed outside the complete control of the correction. People who didn't fully belong to the version of reality they were living in. They were not supposed to exist because they represented something dangerous. Proof. Proof that the world was not as stable as it appeared. Proof that events could be undone. Proof that reality itself was editable. And if enough people realized that, the system would collapse. Not physically, but conceptually. Because a world only works if its rules are believed. And here, belief was everything. The illusion of normalcy depended on universal agreement. A shared understanding that reality was consistent, continuous, and trustworthy. If that belief fractured, if doubt spread, then the corrections would no longer be invisible. They would be questioned, resisted, observed, and the moment a system becomes observable, it becomes vulnerable. That was why the rule existed. Not just to maintain order, but to preserve the appearance of order, to ensure that no one ever saw the corrections happening, to ensure that no one ever remembered what had been erased, to ensure that from every perspective that mattered, nothing unusual ever occurred. Nothing broke, nothing disappeared, nothing contradicted itself, nothing happened. And yet, despite all of that, he stood there, remembering things he was never meant to remember, seeing patterns he was never meant to see, understanding a rule that was never meant to be understood, which meant one thing: the system had accounted for everything, every possibility, every outcome, every deviation, except this, except him. And if the rule of this world was absolute, then his existence was a violation of it, a contradiction that should have been corrected, erased, rewritten, but wasn't, which raised a question far more dangerous than the rule itself. If the system could fix everything, why hadn't it fixed him? The ones who remember. At first, he believed he was alone, that the memories, the fragments, the inconsistencies, the quiet sense that something wasn't right were his burden to carry, a flaw in his perception, a malfunction in his mind, because that was the only explanation that made sense in a world where everything else was so perfectly aligned. Everyone around him moved forward without hesitation. Their lives flowed seamlessly, untouched by doubt or contradiction. They didn't question the past, because to them, the past had never changed. Only he felt it, that subtle friction between what was and what should have been. But over time, something began to shift. It started with small moments. A glance held just a second too long, a hesitation in someone's voice, a sentence that stopped halfway, like a thought that wasn't supposed to form. At first, he ignored it. He had trained himself not to trust these things. Not every inconsistency meant something. Not every anomaly was real. But then it happened. Someone remembered. It was brief, almost insignificant, a passing comment in a conversation that should have been ordinary. "You remember that blackout last week, right?" The words were casual, almost careless, but they hit him like a shock, because there had been no blackout, not officially, not anymore. He studied the person who said it, a man standing beside him, looking uncertain, as if he had already begun to doubt his own words. "What blackout?" someone else asked. The man hesitated, just for a moment, and then, like something slipping out of place and snapping back into position, his expression changed. "Never mind," he said. "I must be thinking of something else." The conversation moved on. No one questioned it. No one remembered, except him. And now someone else had. That was the first crack. After that, he began to notice them everywhere. Not many, never many, but enough. People who paused at the wrong moments. People whose eyes lingered on things that no longer existed. People who carried the same quiet confusion he felt, buried just beneath the surface of their normal lives. They didn't talk about it openly. They couldn't. Because the moment they tried, something would shift. The memory would blur. The certainty would fade. The system was still working, still correcting, but not perfectly, not on them. He started to watch more carefully, to listen more closely, and eventually, he found one. A woman sitting alone in a cafe, staring at an empty chair across from her. Her expression wasn't sad, it wasn't even confused. It was wrong, like she was trying to reconcile two realities at once. He approached cautiously, unsure of what he would say, unsure if he should say anything at all. But before he could speak, she looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, he knew. She remembered. "You see it too," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He didn't respond immediately. There was a risk in acknowledging it, in confirming what neither of them was supposed to know. But the silence between them already said enough. "Yes," he finally said. For a moment, nothing happened. No correction, no shift, no sudden erasure. The world continued as it always had, calm, stable, untouched. And yet something had changed, because now it wasn't just him. "They take things," she said, her voice steady but low. "Not just events, people, moments, entire pieces of reality." He nodded. "I know." She looked down at the empty chair again. "There was someone sitting there," she said. "I can't remember their face. I can't remember their name. But I know they were real." Her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the table. They were important. That was the cruelest part. The system didn't just erase details, it erased meaning. It left behind the outline of something that had once mattered, but removed everything that gave it shape. A presence without identity, a memory without content, a loss without proof. And for those who remembered, that absence was unbearable. "Why us?" he asked. It was the question that had been building in his mind since the beginning. Why them? Why were they able to see what others couldn't? Why were they left outside the correction? The woman shook her head. "I don't think it's intentional," she said. "I think we're mistakes." The word hung in the air between them. Mistakes. Not chosen, not special, not meant to exist, just overlooked. Uncorrected variables in a system designed to eliminate all errors, glitches. That's what they were. And like any glitch, they weren't stable. He had already noticed it in himself, the way certain memories faded if he focused on them too long, the way details slipped away when he tried to hold on to them. The system was still trying to fix him, still trying to pull him back into alignment. And it was working, slowly, inevitably. Unless he looked at her, at the certainty in her eyes, the quiet resistance. "What if we don't let it?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "Don't let it what?" "Don't let it erase everything." For the first time, there was something new in her expression. Not confusion, not fear, possibility. "You think we can stop it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, because he didn't know, but he knew this. As long as even one memory remained, as long as even one person remembered what had been taken, the system wasn't perfect. And if it wasn't perfect, then it could be broken. "We don't have to stop it," he said finally. "We just have to remember." The idea was simple, fragile, dangerous, because memory in this world was not passive. It was resistance. Every remembered moment was a contradiction. A piece of reality that refused to be rewritten, a fragment of truth that existed outside the system's control. And the more they remembered, the more unstable the system became. That was why they were alone. That was why they were few. Because remembering wasn't natural here. It was an error. And errors eventually get corrected. He looked around at the people passing by, laughing, talking, living their uninterrupted lives. They were safe, protected by ignorance, by a reality that constantly reshaped itself to keep them comfortable. But for those who remembered, there was no comfort. Only questions, only fragments, only the growing awareness that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and the terrifying realization that the more they tried to hold on to the truth, the harder the world would try to take it away. Because in a world where nothing is allowed to happen, those who remember are the most dangerous thing that can exist. The Mysterious Man. He didn't appear all at once. There was no dramatic entrance, no moment where the world paused to acknowledge his presence. No one pointed him out, no one reacted, and yet he was there. At first, just at the edges, a reflection in a window that lingered a second too long, a figure standing still in a crowd that never stopped moving, a silhouette at the far end of a street, always distant, always watching. The protagonist noticed him the way you notice something out of place without understanding why. A quiet awareness, a feeling that something didn't belong, even if you couldn't prove it. At first, he ignored it. He had learned to ignore many things. In a world that constantly corrected itself, attention was dangerous. The more you focused on something that didn't align, the more likely it was to disappear, or worse, to take something else with it. But this was different, because the man didn't disappear. No matter how many times reality shifted, no matter how many events were erased, rewritten, or corrected, the man remained, unchanged, unmoved, unacknowledged by everyone except him. That was the first sign. The second was even stranger. The man seemed to anticipate the corrections. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when something was about to happen, an anomaly forming, a disruption building beneath the surface of reality. And in those moments, the man would already be there, watching, waiting, not reacting, not interfering, just observing, as if he already knew what was about to be erased, as if he had seen it happen before. That's when the protagonist made a decision. He stopped avoiding him. He started following him. It wasn't easy. The man never stayed in one place for long. He moved without urgency, yet always out of reach, turning corners just before he could be caught, blending into spaces that should have been empty. And yet, no matter how far he went, no matter how many times he thought he had lost him, the man would appear again, closer each time, until one day he stopped running. It happened in a place that felt strangely disconnected from everything else, a quiet street with no traffic, buildings that looked familiar but not quite real, like copies of something that existed elsewhere. The air was still, too still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a living world. And there, standing in the middle of it, was the man. For the first time, there was no distance between them, no reflections, no obstructions, no escape. Just two people standing in a space that felt outside the normal flow of reality. The protagonist hesitated, not because he was afraid, but because deep down he already knew this moment wasn't supposed to happen, and yet it was happening anyway. "Who are you?" he asked. The question felt heavier than it should have, as if the act of asking it carried consequences he couldn't yet see. The man tilted his head slightly, studying him with a calm, almost clinical curiosity. For a moment, he didn't answer, and in that silence, something shifted. Not in the environment, not in the world, but in the feeling of it, as if reality itself was paying attention. Finally, the man spoke. "I was wondering when you'd ask that." His voice was steady, neutral, not cold, but completely devoid of emotion, not human in the way people usually were. "What are you?" the protagonist pressed. The man's gaze didn't waver. "A function," he said simply. The answer made no sense, and yet it felt more honest than anything else he had heard. "A function of what?" The man gestured lightly to the space around them. "Of this." The protagonist frowned. "This what?" The man paused, as if considering how much to say. Then, almost as an afterthought, he gave an answer that changed everything. "Of the system." The word landed harder than it should have. System. Not world, not reality. System. As if everything he had ever known wasn't natural, wasn't organic, but constructed, maintained, controlled. "You're saying this isn't real?" the protagonist asked. The man's expression didn't change. "That depends on your definition of real." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." The protagonist felt a flicker of frustration, but beneath it, something else. Recognition. Because this man wasn't confused, wasn't guessing. He knew. He understood the rules, the corrections, the erasures, the patterns, on a level far beyond anything the protagonist had been able to piece together. "You've been watching me," the protagonist said. It wasn't a question. The man nodded once. "Yes. Why?" Another pause. Not hesitation, calculation. "Because you weren't corrected." The words sent a chill through him. Not haven't been, weren't, as if it had already been decided, as if something had tried and failed. "That doesn't explain anything," he said. "It explains everything," the man replied. Silence stretched between them. The protagonist took a step forward. The world didn't shift, didn't react. For once, reality allowed it. "What are you supposed to do?" he asked. The man looked at him, really looked at him now, as if evaluating something unseen. "I monitor deviations," he said. "Deviations," the protagonist repeated. "Anomalies, inconsistencies, errors, the same words, the same patterns." "But you don't fix them," the protagonist said. "No." "Then who does?" The man's gaze flickered just for a fraction of a second. "The system corrects itself." "Of course it did. It always had." "But you're part of it," the protagonist said. "Yes." "Then why are you here?" That was the question that mattered, the one that had been building since the beginning. If the system corrected everything, if it erased every anomaly, then why did this man exist? Why wasn't he corrected? For the first time, something changed, not in his expression, but in the tone of the silence that followed. "I don't interfere," the man said slowly. "I observe." "That's not an answer. It's the only reason you're still here." The words hit harder than anything else. Still here. Not safe, not protected, just not removed. "Then what am I?" the protagonist asked. His voice was quieter now, not out of fear, but because deep down, he already knew the answer would change everything. The man stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just precise. "You're not supposed to exist in this state," he said. Every word was measured, exact. Your memory should have been corrected. It wasn't. "Yes. Why?" The man studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something, as if confirming something. And then finally, he answered, "You're the result of a failed correction." The world didn't shake, didn't collapse, didn't react at all. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant this impossible truth fit within the system, had been accounted for in some way. "You're a glitch," the man continued. The word hung in the air, heavy, final. "And glitches," he added quietly, "don't get to stay forever." For a moment, neither of them moved. The space around them remained still, unnaturally so, as if reality itself was waiting, watching. The protagonist swallowed, his thoughts racing. If he was a glitch, then the system would eventually fix him, erase him, rewrite him, just like everything else. Unless he looked at the man, at the one thing that didn't fit, the one thing that existed outside the normal rules. "You're still here," he said. The man didn't respond. "You haven't been corrected either." Another pause, and this time, it was different. Because for the first time since this began, the man didn't have an immediate answer, which meant one thing. Even within the system, there were things that didn't fully make sense, and that was far more dangerous than any glitch. The device. The man didn't take it out immediately. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other in that unnatural stillness, the air around them too quiet, too controlled. The world beyond that space felt distant, like something paused rather than continuing. The protagonist could feel it now. Not just the corrections, not just the system, but something deeper, something watching, waiting. Then, without a word, the man reached into his coat. The movement was slow, deliberate, not cautious, but precise, as if every action had already been calculated long before this moment occurred. When his hand emerged, he was holding something small. At first glance, it didn't look like anything special. A device, compact, smooth, no visible seams or buttons, except for a single surface that faintly reflected the ambient light. It was neither metallic nor plastic. It didn't seem to be made of anything familiar at all. And yet, the moment the protagonist saw it, something in him reacted. Not recognition, but awareness, like a memory that hadn't fully formed. "What is that?" he asked quietly. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he extended his hand slightly, offering the device without forcing it. An invitation, not an order. The protagonist hesitated. Every instinct told him not to take it. Because this, whatever it was, felt different from everything else. More dangerous. More real than the world around them. But at the same time, it felt like the answer. Slowly, he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the device activated. A faint vibration, a soft pulse of light. And then, a screen appeared. Not turning on, not lighting up, just existing, as if it had always been there, waiting to be seen. On the display, a single line of text formed. Reality version, 17.4. The protagonist's breath caught slightly. Version. Not timeline, not universe. Version. As if reality itself was something that could be updated, modified, replaced. He looked up the man. This is he began, but the words didn't come, because he didn't know what this was. Not fully, not yet. Below the text, another element appeared. A button. Simple, unlabeled at first, then slowly letters faded into view. Rollback. The word felt heavier than it should have. Not just a command, a decision. What does it do? He asked, though part of him already knew. The man finally spoke. It restores a previous state. The answer was calm, neutral, but the implications, they weren't. A previous version? The protagonist asked. Yes. His grip on the device tightened slightly. And this version, he asked. 17.4, what does that mean? It's the current iteration, the man replied. Iteration, another word that didn't belong to a natural world. How many are there? The protagonist asked. The man didn't answer immediately, and that silence was enough. Too many. Far too many. The protagonist looked back at the screen, at the number, at the button beneath it, and suddenly everything he had experienced, the corrections, the erased events, the missing people, it all began to align in a way that was far more terrifying than before. This isn't just fixing things, he said slowly. No, the man replied. This is resetting them. Yes. The simplicity of the answer made it worse, because it meant the system didn't just correct small errors. It could undo entire sequences, entire chains of cause and effect, entire realities. What happens if I press it? The protagonist asked. The man's gaze remained steady. Everything returns to a prior stable state. No anomalies, he continued. No missing time. No inconsistencies. The words were familiar, too familiar, as if they had been said before, as if this explanation itself was part of a pattern. A clean version, the man finished. The protagonist's mind raced. A clean version. A world without errors. A world where everything made sense. A world where nothing strange ever happened. A world where nothing happened. He looked down at the device again, at the button. His thumb hovered just above it. What about everything that's happened? He asked. Gone, the man said. Erased, rewritten. The distinction mattered, more than he wanted it to. And the people, he pressed. The man didn't look away. They will continue, he said, as they always have, without interruption, without awareness, without loss, because they wouldn't remember. The protagonist felt a tightening in his chest. And me? He asked. This time, the pause was longer. Not hesitation, but wait. You will be included in the correction, the man said. Included, the protagonist repeated. Yes. That means you won't remember either. The words landed softly, but they echoed, loud, endlessly. Everything he had seen, everything he had realized, everything he had fought to hold on to, gone. Not just forgotten, never existed. He would become like everyone else, aligned, stable, corrected, safe. The idea should have been comforting, a return to normal, a release from the burden of knowing. But instead, it felt like erasure, not of events, but of himself. Because what was he, without those memories, without the awareness, without the understanding that something was wrong? He wouldn't be the same person. He wouldn't even know there had ever been something to question. He would just exist, like everyone else, and the world would continue, perfect, unbroken, unaware. The device pulsed faintly in his hand, as if waiting, as if it understood the weight of the decision. Why give this to me? He asked. The man's answer came without delay. Because you're the anomaly. That's exactly why I shouldn't have it, the protagonist said. On the contrary, the man replied, you're the only one who can use it. The logic was cold, precise, unavoidable. The system couldn't correct itself completely, not with him in it, not while he remembered, which meant the correction had to be chosen. He looked down at the button again. Rollback. One action, one decision, and everything would be undone. Every anomaly erased, every inconsistency resolved, every memory gone. The world would be restored to a version where nothing had ever gone wrong, where nothing strange had ever happened, where nothing had ever happened. His thumb moved slightly closer. The space around them felt tighter now, heavier, as if reality itself was waiting for the outcome, watching, just like the man, just like the system. Will it stop? He asked quietly. The man didn't pretend not to understand. No. The answer was immediate. There will always be deviations. Then what's the point? The protagonist asked. The man's gaze sharpened slightly. To maintain stability. Not perfection. Not truth. Stability. The word lingered, because now he understood. This wasn't about creating a perfect world. It was about maintaining a believable one. a version of reality that people could accept, a version that felt consistent, even if it wasn't true, even if it had been rewritten countless times before. He looked at the device one last time, at the version number, 17.4. How many times had this happened? How many resets? How many worlds erased and replaced? And in how many of them had someone like him existed? Someone who remembered, someone who questioned, someone who stood at this exact moment, holding this exact device, facing this exact choice. The thought sent a quiet chill through him, because if it had happened before, then maybe this wasn't the first time. Maybe it wasn't even the first time for him. His thumb hovered over the button. Closer now. Just one movement, one small action, and everything would go back. The noise, the confusion, the fragments, the truth, all of it would disappear, and the world would continue, as if nothing had ever happened. The man said nothing. He didn't need to, because this part, this decision, was never his to make. Only the anomaly could choose. Only the glitch could decide whether to remain or to be corrected. The choice. His thumb hovered just above the button, so close he could feel the faint warmth radiating from the surface of the device. It pulsed gently, steady, patient, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Or maybe it did. For a moment, everything else faded. The empty street, the unmoving air, the man standing in front of him. All of it became distant. Because nothing mattered more than this. One decision, one action, and everything would change. Or rather, everything would unchange. He swallowed slowly, his eyes fixed on the word beneath his thumb. Rollback. It looked simple, too simple. There was no warning, no confirmation, no explanation of consequences beyond what had already been said. Just a button, as if undoing reality required nothing more than a single, quiet choice. "Do you know what you're asking me to do?" he said, his voice low. The man didn't respond immediately. "You already understand," he said. That was the problem. He did. That's what made it impossible. His mind raced, not forward, but backward, through every moment he had experienced since the first inconsistency, every erased event, every fragment of memory that refused to disappear, the accident that never happened, the conversation no one remembered, the empty spaces where people should have been, and the others, the ones who remembered. The woman in the cafe, the look in her eyes when she realized she wasn't alone. If he pressed the button, she would forget. She would sit there again in that same chair, across from someone she couldn't remember ever losing, but without even the awareness that something was missing. She would be whole again, stable, corrected, and she would never know the difference. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like betrayal. "Everything goes back," he said quietly. "Yes. No one remembers. Yes. No one suffers from what's been erased. Yes." The answers came without hesitation, clean, logical, absolute. The system's solution, a perfect reset, a perfect lie. His thumb trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because part of him wanted to press it, to let go, to stop carrying the weight of knowing. Because remembering wasn't just awareness, it was pain, the constant tension between what he knew had happened and what the world insisted had not. The isolation, the doubt, the endless questioning. What if this was better? What if ignorance really was peace? What if the world was meant to be this way, stable, seamless, unbroken, even if it wasn't true? He exhaled slowly. "Have I done this before?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. The man didn't react, didn't look surprised, which was, in itself, an answer. "I don't retain data across versions," the man said. Not a denial, not a confirmation, just absence, which meant one thing. It was possible, more than possible, likely. A quiet realization settled over him. This moment, this exact moment, might not be unique. He might have stood here before, holding this device, asking these same questions, feeling this same conflict, and each time making a choice he would never remember. Because the moment he pressed the button, everything would be erased, including the fact that he had ever chosen at all. The idea sent a cold wave through him. "How many times?" he whispered. The man didn't answer, because the number didn't matter, not if it was forgotten every time. He looked down at the device again, at the version number, 17.4, 17 versions, at least, 17 resets, 17 worlds rewritten, and this was just the current one. How many came before that weren't even recorded anymore? How many lives had been lived and erased without a trace? His grip tightened. This isn't fixing anything, he said. It's repeating it. Correction requires iteration, the man replied. Iteration, the same word, the same logic, cold, efficient, endless. Then it never ends, the protagonist said. No. The honesty of that answer cut deeper than anything else, because it meant this cycle was permanent. There would always be anomalies, there would always be corrections, there would always be resets, and there would always be someone like him standing here, making this choice, unless he looked up at the man, at the one thing that didn't quite fit into the system. What happens if I don't press it, he asked. For the first time, the man didn't respond immediately, and in that hesitation, there was something new, something uncertain. Instability increases, the man said finally. Define instability. The man's gaze held his. More anomalies, more inconsistencies, more people remembering. The protagonist felt his pulse quicken slightly. More like me. Yes. That wasn't a warning. It was a possibility. A world where the system couldn't fully correct itself. A world where memory persisted, where truth, however fragmented, remained. But at what cost? What happens then, he asked. The man's answer was quieter this time. The system adapts. And if it can't, silence. Real silence. Not the controlled stillness of before, but something deeper, something undefined. That outcome is unverified, the man said. Unverified. For the first time, there was something the system didn't know, something it hadn't accounted for, and that changed everything. Because up until this moment, the system had always been in control, always correcting, always maintaining, always ensuring that nothing truly broke. But this was a variable, an unknown, something beyond prediction. His thumb hovered over the button again, but now it felt different. Before it had been a choice between chaos and stability. Now it was something else entirely, a choice between certainty and possibility. If he pressed it, the world would reset. Everything would return to normal. The cycle would continue. Nothing would change. If he didn't, the system would face something it couldn't fully control, something it couldn't guarantee, something that might break it or might not. There were no answers, no assurances, no version number to fall back on, just uncertainty, real uncertainty, the kind that couldn't be corrected. He let out a slow breath, and for the first time since this began, he felt something that wasn't imposed by the system, not fear, not confusion, not doubt, choice, real choice, not an illusion of control, not a predetermined outcome, but something genuine, something that mattered. He looked at the man one last time. You said you don't interfere, he said. I don't. Then why are you still here? The man didn't respond, but this time he didn't need to, because the answer was already clear. He was here to observe, to witness, to record whether the system would continue or change. The protagonist looked down at the device, at the button, at the weight of everything it represented. And then slowly his thumb began to move, not hesitating, not trembling, just moving, toward a decision that would either erase everything or finally let something happen. His thumb pressed down. There was no resistance, no confirmation, no dramatic surge of light or sound, just a soft, almost inaudible click, and then nothing. No explosion of energy, no visible collapse, no distortion tearing through the world. For a brief suspended moment, everything simply stopped. Not frozen, not paused, just absent, like a frame missing from existence itself. And then the world returned. The street was no longer empty. Cars moved steadily along the road. People walked past each other, absorbed in their own lives. Conversations overlapped, footsteps echoed, the quiet rhythm of a normal day reasserting itself with effortless precision. Everything was fine, perfectly fine, too fine. There was no trace of what had come before, no sign of the stillness, no echo of the decision, no evidence that anything had ever been different. The system had done its job. Reality had been restored. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, blinking slightly as if adjusting to the light. For a moment, he didn't move, not because something felt wrong, but because nothing did. A faint sense of hesitation lingered, like a thought that had almost formed but never quite reached the surface. He looked around. The world made sense. Everything aligned. Everything fit. There were no gaps, no inconsistencies, no strange feelings pressing against the edges of his awareness. just a quiet, stable reality, exactly as it should be. A car passed in front of him. He watched it without thinking. No memory of a crash, no expectation of disruption, just motion, predictable, continuous, safe. He exhaled softly, unaware that just moments ago, he had been holding the weight of an entirely different world in his hands. Across the street, a cafe sat quietly between two buildings. Inside, a woman sat alone at a table. A cup of coffee rested in front of her, untouched. She stared out the window, her expression neutral, calm, complete. There was no empty chair across from her, no lingering sense of absence, no feeling that something or someone should have been there. She was simply sitting, like she always had, like she always would. The man was gone, or rather, he had never been there. No one had seen him. No one remembered him. There was no trace of a figure standing outside the system, observing its corrections. No evidence of a function monitoring deviations. No indication that reality had ever required such a thing, because in this version, there were no deviations, no anomalies, no glitches. The protagonist began to walk, not with urgency, not with purpose, just forward, blending into the flow of people around him. Another part of the system, another piece of a world that no longer needed correction because it had already been corrected. The device was gone. There was no weight in his hand, no memory of holding it, no knowledge of what it had been capable of, no awareness that he had ever made a choice, because that choice, like everything else, had been erased. The world continued, seamless, unbroken, unquestioned, a perfect iteration, a stable version, a reality where nothing strange had ever occurred, where nothing had been lost, where nothing had been rewritten, where nothing had ever needed to be fixed. On a digital billboard above the street, an advertisement flickered briefly, just a fraction of a second, too fast for anyone to notice. The image distorted, glitched, and then corrected itself instantly, returning to normal before it could be seen. No one reacted, no one looked up, no one remembered. The protagonist paused for a moment, just a moment. His eyes shifted slightly as if something had caught his attention, a flicker, a sensation, something almost familiar. But it passed, quickly, leaving behind nothing but the quiet certainty that everything was exactly as it should be. He continued walking. The screen fades to black, silence, complete. Then, a faint flicker, barely visible, like something trying to surface. A single line of text appears. Nothing happened. A pause, then, for just a fraction of a second, another line forces its way through. Unstable, incomplete, almost erased as soon as it appears. Memory fragment detected. Darkness again. Final twist. At first, it's easy to miss. There is no sound, no dramatic glitch tearing across the screen, no warning that something has gone wrong, because nothing has gone wrong. The world continues exactly as it should. Morning light spills across the city. People wake up, they check their phones, they move through routines they've followed countless times before. Everything is smooth, predictable, stable. There are no anomalies, no missing time, no strange feelings that something has been erased. The system is working perfectly, and yet something remains. It starts as a delay, not in reality, but in perception. A man reaches for a door handle. For a fraction of a second, less than a blink, his hand pauses mid-air. Not because he chose to stop, but because something interrupted the motion. Then it continues, naturally, seamlessly, as if nothing happened. Across the city, a woman sits in a cafe. She lifts her cup, stops. Just for a moment, her eyes unfocus slightly, like she's trying to remember something that isn't there. Then she blinks, and the moment is gone. No one notices, because there is nothing to notice, except the system does. Deep beneath the surface of reality, beyond perception, beyond memory, something registers, not as an event, not as an error, but as a deviation, a pattern that doesn't fully align, a signal that shouldn't exist. For the first time since the reset, something persists. A fragment. It doesn't appear all at once. It surfaces in pieces, disconnected, incomplete, a feeling without context, an image without origin, a word without meaning. The man walking down the street slows slightly. He doesn't know why, but something presses against his thoughts, a shape, a memory, not clear enough to understand, but too present to ignore. A hand, holding something, a small device, a screen. He stops. Just for a second, his breath catches. There is no reason for it, no visible cause, and yet his heart beats faster. The image vanishes, replaced instantly by normalcy, by certainty, by a reality that insists nothing is missing. But the damage is done. Elsewhere, more fragments appear, a word spoken incorrectly, a reflection that lingers too long, a shadow that doesn't match its source. Tiny inconsistencies, harmless on their own, invisible to those who don't know what to look for. But they are not random, they are spreading, not through events, not through time, but through memory. The system responds, it always does. Corrections initiate instantly, adjustments ripple through reality, memories are realigned, perceptions are stabilized, the fragments are targeted, isolated, removed, but this time something is different. They don't disappear completely. Each correction leaves behind something smaller, fainter, but still there, like trying to erase a mark that has already soaked into the surface. The system increases its response, more aggressive, more precise, more frequent. But the fragments persist, because they are no longer just errors, they are echoes. Echoes of something that was never supposed to exist in the first place, a memory that survived deletion, a choice that should have been erased, a glitch that wasn't fully corrected. The man stops walking again, this time longer. His eyes narrow slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition. He doesn't know what he's remembering. He doesn't understand why it matters, but for the first time, he feels it clearly. Something happened. The thought is incomplete, unstable, dangerous. The system reacts instantly, a surge of correction, a forced alignment. The thought collapses before it can fully form, but not before leaving something behind. A trace, far beyond the visible world, in a layer no human mind can perceive. A line of text appears, not on a screen, not in a device, but within the system itself. Memory fragment detected. The message lingers, longer than it should, longer than any anomaly has ever been allowed to exist. For the first time, the system does not immediately correct it, because it can't. The fragment isn't just in one place. It isn't tied to a single event or a single person. It has spread, quietly, invisibly, irreversibly. The rollback worked. The world was restored, everything returned to normal. But something unexpected happened in the process. The glitch wasn't erased. It changed. And now it's everywhere. The screen flickers one last time. A new line appears beneath the first. Source unknown. Then, for the briefest possible moment, a third line forces its way into existence. Unstable, fighting to remain. Origin you. There is a moment, right before a thought disappears. A space so small it almost doesn't exist. A fraction of awareness. A hesitation between what you know and what you're about to forget. You felt it before. You just didn't notice. A name on the tip of your tongue, gone before you can say it. A dream that felt important but fades the second you wake up. A sudden feeling that something isn't right, quickly replaced by the certainty that everything is fine. You call it distraction, fatigue, a trick of the mind. But what if it isn't? What if those moments are not failures of memory, but interruptions? Small corrections, minor adjustments, tiny rollbacks happening in real time. You wouldn't notice, you're not supposed to, because the system doesn't need to erase everything, just enough, just the parts that don't fit. And you, like everyone else, move forward, unaware, unaffected, unchanged. Or at least, that's what you believe. But sometimes, very rarely, something slips through. Not a full memory, not a complete event, just a fragment. A feeling that lingers too long, a thought that doesn't fully disappear, a question that forms without a clear origin. And in that moment, you pause, not long enough for anyone else to notice, not even long enough for you to understand why, but long enough for something to almost surface. Something like, this has happened before, and then it's gone. Replaced, corrected, smoothed out. The world continues, as it always does. Perfect, stable, untouched. But now, there's a possibility. Not that the system is broken, not that reality is collapsing, but that something, somewhere, didn't get fully erased. A fragment that survived, a trace that remained, a glitch that adapted. And if even one fragment can persist, then it can happen again, and again, and again, until one day the correction isn't fast enough, until one moment lasts just a little longer than it should, long enough for you to notice, long enough for you to question, long enough to realize that the world you trust might not be as stable as it seems. Because if nothing ever happens, then why do you sometimes feel like something did? The screen fades to black, silence. Then, very softly, almost impossible to hear, a final line appears. Rollback incomplete.
Shadows crawl